And boo. Hey, everyone. StreamYard's acting a little wonky this evening. Welcome to the Ghost of Bacon podcast. I'm your host, Jake Roberts. And what I want to do this evening, I want to give some shout outs here. I see a lot of the our usual viewers here are in the house. I want to give you some shout outs. David Neeson, Adam Thomas, Z Zantlo. Jeff Freeman's in the house. My sister Penny, good to see you, Pen. Brent, good to see you. Jason, my friend, glad you could make it. Jan, of course, I already said hi. Lonnie, good to see you. Jenny. And I think that's everyone, Jan. Yeah. So it's in the chat. There's Ray popping in. Good to see you too, Ray. So welcome to the show tonight, everyone. I just kind of didn't give this one a real big run up, but I think it's going to be an interesting show. I think you're going to enjoy it. And it's basically inspired by friend and fellow researcher and author Scott Clark. His book, Oak Island Odyssey. I'll get it there. If you haven't already picked up this book, you need to get it. It's probably one of the best books I've read about Oak Island, Nova Scotia. And Scott is his pedigree going back in terms of having studied Oak Island. It goes way back, and he mentions some of the same people that I initially had talked to many years ago when I first became involved in Oak Island, and so this has been a real fun read for me. And a couple of things that he said in it really struck me because there was a lot in this book that I didn't know. One of the things was actually the very first 3 recorded speculative Freemasons who joined Freemasonry in Scotland. And it was none other than a name that will be familiar to viewers of this show. And that was Sir William Alexander, his brother Anthony, and William Alexander's son, William. And so I know some of you have been, kind of doing a lot of this research on your own. I talked to other people about this. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and I'll be giving Court Lindahl a shout out here as well, during my presentation, that we. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, isn't it great? What a great book. I'll be talking to Scott here. I think in a little bit, I'll be sending him a message to see if I can get him on here to kind of clarify some of these things. But again, not so much that tonight's going to be about Oak Island per se, but it is about Oak Island research a bit. And I wasn't able to do my intro video this evening either. Like I said, StreamYard seems to be a little bit wonky here today. I'm not really sure what's going on. Could be something as simple as having to restart my machine, which I haven't done in a while. And AO has changed it back a while to Tau, which I love. And yes, thank you, my friend. Definitely hit the like button. Follow me. The more followers we get, the bigger I can make this podcast and let it grow. So I'm going to get into this presentation here. Let me do it this way, maybe. I think this will be the best option. All right, so there are some aliases that I haven't really gone over. We've mentioned it. I've talked about the possibility of a couple of these as being aliases or masks. And so tonight I'm going to kind of get into it. And it goes back to the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, which Court Lindahl has discussed at length in his work. So I want to give him a shout out. And now Mary Sidney is the name of the Countess of Pembroke. Her brother, Philip, wrote Arcadia. And this, as you can see, this is a miniature portrait of Mary Sidney by none other than our friend Nicholas Hilliard, who we know was an alias of Walter Raleigh. Now, she is the sister of Philip Sidney, and he was the author of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. Now, this is a pastoral romance. We're going to get into what that means. And like I said, Court Lindahl has done a ton of work on this in relating the Arcadia, or portions of it, to what happened in Oak Island. Now, there's a portion of the story where one of the characters finds an indent in the ground and digs down, and it's very much the same story as we've heard about the discovery of the money pit on the show The Curse of Oak Island. And so, since it has the same story, this money pit discovery, and Court and others have picked up on his trail and have kind of related this idea. But it actually goes back farther than just Pembroke's Arcadia. It goes back to the legend of the three sojourners in the book of, I believe it was Enoch. So there's a treasure story in the Arcadia. And here you see Philip Sidney with his collection of sonnets, Astrophel and Stella. He was a prominent courtier during the Elizabethan era, and as I said, a poet. And he was famous for Astrophel and Stella. And you see the frontispiece here. And I've talked about this in the past, and in particular this frontispiece, because it does have elements or the fingerprints of Francis Bacon. So first of all, there are 108 sonnets, and we know that 108 is the value of the name Francis in reverse cipher. It's kind of what I do in terms of when I start looking for signposts. That's nothing definitive, but it certainly is a neat indication. But if we add the 11 songs, we get 119, which is Francois in reverse cipher as well. And so these are just like little signposts for me that this needs a closer look. Also, you can see that it's Sir P.S. And if we add the letters P and S together, in simple cipher, we get 33. So, and as I said, he's even more famous for Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. And so I had to consider that maybe Bacon wrote this using Philip Sidney as a mask. So when we look at the frontispiece of this, you'll see that, first of all, it's called a pastoral romance, okay? And like I said, researcher and author, my friend Court Lindahl, he identified that similarity between the story that happens here and what the money pit on Oak Island. Now, his first version was considered incomplete, and it's referred to as the Old Arcadia. He then reorganized it and expanded a little bit into the New Arcadia. So it was different enough where scholars have made this distinction. So, and there were other versions of it too floating around. So, in my mind, the Rosi Crosse was at work here, sending their messages around. So, I decided to try out the RC alias or mask formula, and to do this, of course, we use something called the fourfold cipher, and we have to calculate the value of the name in fourfold. And so, basically, when you have a double letter, for example, in the word fourfold itself, the letter F appears twice, O appears twice. And so what you do is you take the simple cipher values of that letter and add 24 for the first alphabet. If you have a triple set of letters, the same letter appears 3 times, well, then you add 48 to the simple cipher value. And if you have 4, it's simple plus 72, and it goes on from there. But usually it only goes up to 4. Next, you have to identify any mythological references that either the poet made or the painter used, or something of that nature. And what this does, it allows us to identify the names of Greek or Roman gods and goddesses, and they are, of course, associated with the known planets of the solar system at the time. And so what this does is this points us to Agrippa's magic squares. And once we understand, okay, what god or goddess is being is mentioned, and then we look for that known planet, each of Agrippa's magic squares are also associated with the known planets at the time. The formula simply involves subtracting the magic square constant from the fourfold value, and that usually will result in a Bacon or Raleigh value if it's actually an alias or a mask. And now here's just 4 examples of the 7 magic squares that we use for this process. The 3 by 3 up to the 6x6. It goes up to 9x9. You can actually make bigger ones, but we won't get into that this evening. These were the ones that were at play. So I applied the formula to Philip Sidney in the spelling he used. And you can see in the table at the right, we have 2 P's and 3 I's. And so we have to, account for the values of that in fourfold. Interestingly, sometimes a form of message will appear in the values as they appear in fourfold. For example, 39 is the reverse cipher. No, it's actually the simple cipher value of the word king. 57 we can all identify as the triple tau, or representing the name Francis III. So our sum in fourfold of Philip Sidney is 178. Now in Arcadia, there are mentions of both Apollo and Venus. I mean, he alludes to the Muses and Apollo a few times, and of course Venus is referenced along with Cupid. And so Apollo is associated with the sun, and therefore the 6x6 magic square. The 6x6 magic square has a constant of 111, which we subtract from 178, and the result is 67, the value of Francis in simple cipher. So this could be an indication, along with the contextual evidence on the frontispiece and actual, if I were able to get my hands on a facsimile of the work itself, I'm sure we'd find more or additional information. However, this is a good indication that Francis Bacon used Philip Sidney as a mask. If we take the value of Venus and the 7x7 magic square, which is 175, and subtract it, we have a result of 3. And so if we use both of these values, it could very well be an indication of Francis III. Again, interesting set of correlations here. Is it a coincidence? I'm thinking it isn't. But when we look at the new Arcadia, someone else decided to try their hand at this. And this is Sir William Alexander, the first Earl of Stirling. What he did was he decided many years later to pick up Philip Sidney's Arcadia and finish it for him. There was a section in there that I'll be talking about that people felt was incomplete, and William Alexander all of a sudden decides to grab a hold of someone else's work and fix it. Now, this coming from Court Lindahl in his book, the Shepherds of Arcadia, Shepherds of Arcadia Solution. I have it here on my desk as well. The Stuart kings and queens ruled from Stirling. And so here we have Sir William Alexander, the first Earl of Stirling. Very interesting. And so he was a courtier poet to James VI in Scotland. He later became the gentleman usher to Prince Charles, who would later become Charles I. And so he was also given a lordship and barony of Nova Scotia. In other words, he was in charge. For all intents and purposes, it became his own kingdom. Now, Scott Clark states that William Alexander, his son William II, and his brother Anthony were the very first three speculative Freemasons. Now, there's a difference between Freemasonry and speculative Freemasonry. We've talked about this before on the show, and other people have addressed this as well. You have the Stonemasons Guild of the operative Masons. In other words, they go out and they work with stone. Speculative Freemasons don't. They do it in terms of symbolism and trying to become better people. And so this is the guy who added a section to Sidney's Arcadia, and we have indications that Philip Sidney was actually just a mask for Francis Bacon. And so what he did was he linked book 3 of the new version to the ending of the 1593 version. And so people always ask, why would this guy all of a sudden come along and add to someone else's work? Well, if Bacon did use Sidney as a mask, then Sir William Alexander, in his connections to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, is very similar to the connections of Bacon and Raleigh wanting to colonize Nova Scotia and Newfoundland in the New World. And Raleigh had a son, his son Watt, and as I've discussed in other shows, they faked his death so he wouldn't get in trouble for attacking the Spanish. And if we consider that Raleigh was Easton, now you have Peter Easton operating out of Newfoundland, and we have Sir William Alexander, who was basically the Lord and Baron of Newfoundland. So these guys are operating in the same area. A lot of neat coincidences going on here. So what happens when we apply the alias formula to Sir William Alexander? Here you can see another woodcut of, there's Raleigh, and there's William. Very similar features. So William Alexander, fourfold cipher, totals 259. And again, you can see the values of II is 33, which is Bacon. Triple A is 49, which is Raleigh. 29 is a short cipher value of Frater. So just interesting little signposts. The sum of William Alexander is actually the same as Shakespeare in K. So he also makes these references to Apollo and the Muses in his work. And as we know, Apollo is the sun god, indicating our 6x6 magic square with its constant of 111. So we subtract, and we have 148. This is not a common value of like, I mean, we look at 67, we immediately recognize that as the simple cipher signature for the name Francis. However, if you're familiar with my latest book, The Keys of the Rosi Crosse, 148 is a highly significant number. In that book, I detail all of the evidence that shows that Sir Walter Raleigh was Bacon's twin brother. And in that famous portrait of Walter Raleigh, there is a motto of virtute et amor, virtue and love. And that motto comes up with this, all the signatures in all 5 cipher systems of the name Walter Stewart I. And 148 is Walter Stewart I in reverse cipher. So his brother Anthony Alexander was, well, Walter had a twin named Francis Bacon. And his son Watt, I demonstrated in my latest book how his death was faked. In fact, Tiberio Tonelli, one of Bacon's early aliases, one that he really liked, actually painted a portrait of a young German doctor, and I've identified that young German doctor was actually Watt as an adult, living in Germany as a doctor. Now, Francis, Walter, and Watt, were they the first 3 speculative Freemasons? Well, according to the plaque cipher text, it states, "My Phi fraternity evolved into Freemasonry." So this indicates that these 3 guys became the first 3 speculative Freemasons. They were the Phi fraternity. They were the Frau Rosi Crosse. And my latest work that is unpublished, one of the messages, Bacon comes out and he says, "I trust the Quiet Guild Freemasons." So, I think it's logically far more likely that Walter finished or improved his twin brother's book or work. And it would have been kind of like an inside joke of, yeah, you couldn't fix it, but I did it for you. William Alexander finished the work of Philip Sidney. There's no evidence that these men, as they exist in history, ever knew each other. So I believe at this point that Francis Bacon did use Philip Sidney as a mask. William Alexander, I believe, was an identity that Raleigh used to rule in the New World. And he had that lordship and barony from James I and later Charles I as well. So interesting correlations to be sure. What are your thoughts? I'd like to see what you have to say about these ideas here in the chat. Let's see. That's a great question, Jeff. Have we ever figured out how many different masks Bacon had? At this point, I've identified a dozen. And I like that as a nice round number, but simply because, that's how many tasks Hercules accomplished, right? So, but who knows? There could be more. Decoder Ring, you always have interesting comments. Wounded in the right ear was 111 reduction cipher in the 26-letter alphabet. That's interesting. Yeah, David, you know what? That's an entire possibility as well. 33 masks, who knows? Yeah. Brett says the same thing. Jan's asking, could it be, given how long it takes to get a manuscript published these modern days? It took even longer in those days. So maybe it was a team effort, and any aliases were a group alias. That's Jan. That's a great question and a great observation, and I believe that's exactly what happened with Shakespeare, with the works of Shakespeare. However, you had Bacon at the helm of that, and so ultimately overseeing the whole operation. Now, the thing is, back then, when they would create a manuscript, a lot of times there would just be one copy and they would pass it around. And so, and then if it was a significant work, they would start making copies. And then from there, they would go printing. But for the most part, most manuscripts were just written out by hand and then passed around. And in fact, there are a couple of different examples where that happened. With the Fama Fraternitatis and the Rosicrucian Manifestos, they were just passed around by hand, and then suddenly it got out, and next thing you know, someone started copying and publishing it. Yeah, Carolyn, and that's just it. They all do look alike, don't they? Yes. Great question, David. James question. Yes, he found what he believes was Alexander's order medal at New Ross, and James is what I would call the expert on William Alexander, honestly. And he and I have talked about this in the past, and he didn't rule it out. He said it's certainly a possibility that, but especially since once you understand that William Alexander was also, one of the go-to guys for Charles I. And when you realize that all of these individuals were related, right? When you have Francis and Walter being twins, you have James being their younger half-brother, and then, of course, you're going to see that Charles I would have been Walter's nephew. So that's it, Let's see. Oh, Jason has a good. Sidney was in a love triangle with William Cecil's daughter and Lord Edward de Vere. P.S. Then married Walsingham's daughter. Interesting. He did marry Walsingham's daughter. Yeah. And if we consider that de Vere may have been a mask as well. Yeah, good answer. Linda said, yes, David, it was James, but not physically found it. He found the person who found it, and he actually took it to the war room and showed it to the fellowship. And well, that's a good, interesting thought. It's a precursor to Elon Musk working on finishing Tesla's projects. Yeah. Neither were alive at the same time, but one is carrying the torch of the genius before him. Yeah, and when you look at Orthodox history, basically it states that William Alexander would have only been 9 years old when Philip Sidney died. So that's why I, of the mindset that Sidney was being used as a mask. Isn't that true, Z? Isn't that funny how they all look alike? Yeah. Brent, he says, having grown up in the Oak Island area, I wonder what they saw and liked on the island. In my opinion, Brent, I can't speak to, the Templar activity or any of that. Like I said, I focus on Bacon and Raleigh. For them, what appealed, well, to Raleigh, first of all, he was the first one to use it. before bacon, but he liked the location. Part of it was the symbolism of the coordinates. Yeah. Is that great, Adam? The number one baron in the region, suddenly he was able to go ahead and rule, and Easton, said, "Hey, I'm king of the seven seas. Why do I need a pardon?" When he was offered multiple pardons, he said, "I don't need one. I am a king." So it's an interesting way for him to actually have it be official, in my opinion. I've identified several Chi-Rho symbols used on frontispieces of these books found on Sonnets and FF. It is also on Estrafel and Stella. Very good, Jason. Yes. And, that is, the word that they use as their sign, seal, and signature, right? The Rosi Crosse. He states in the Fama, we will use the word, and he uses the letter CR, which is curious because people always say that the letters CR are not a word, but Chi-Rho is a word. And they put Chi-Rho on everything. And Jason has been able to parse that out for us in spades. As usual, Daniel, I wish I could pull off a ruffled collar. If I wore one of those, I'd have to be pulling it off because that would drive me nuts. Yes. And the P top completes the Chi-Rho. Very good. Well, and that's really what they were doing, Tao, is they were shuffling off one mortal coil and putting on another, to use the words of Shakespeare. And yes, they were masters of it, for sure, Jeff. Z says, I find IHS forwards and in reverse in their writings. Yeah, they use that symbol frequently. Very good. So, this is my favorite part of doing the podcast is simply reading your comments and seeing how everyone else contributes to the show. And in my opinion, that's the best part of this. And that's exactly what happens, Brent. You hide in plain sight as people only see what they expect. And it all has to do with that idea of confirmation bias, right? Where we tend to see what we want to see and ignore the things that we don't want to, for sure. Controversial with Char Fredlicks. I have not talked to Ryan in a while. I've been trying to follow his work when I get a chance to. And you're right. He has a ton of interesting ideas. We used to talk at least once a week, but, I know that he's been very busy on site and I've been making plans also to get on with some of my sites as well. So it takes us a while to kind of connect up, but we usually do. That's exactly right, David. David Neeson. Like the date palms in the tree line. Absolutely. What David is referring to here, of course, is that famous image of the battle with the Iroquois with Salmon de Champlain in the foreground. And in the background are 3 palm trees on the shore of Lake Champlain, right in plain sight. And again, this is part and parcel of what I've been talking about. We tend to as Tao points out, not everyone back then had a birth certificate. They had a lot of them would have baptismal certificates, and that's what a lot of researchers have gone on. And that's right, David, two Champlain images. Yeah. But back then it would have been easier for them to, fake a death, take on a new identity, and move on without anyone really taking notice. Yeah, Jen, great question. So are there aliases only on paper? It's not like they could walk around the neighborhood and all of a sudden they had a different name. Well, that's exactly it. When you're talking about people who are really just simply doing something very simple to change their appearance, one of those things that we don't consider. For example, let's talk about Tycho Brahe. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but maybe it's Tycho. But he was a famous engineer at the time, and he had a brass nose because allegedly his cousin or stepbrother he had gotten in a duel with a relative, and the relative cut off his nose with a sword, which I think is just nonsense. It's a ruse. It's nothing but a disguise. And if someone's walking around with a brass nose, all you're going to do is stare at the brass nose. If you're walking around as Sir Francis Bacon and he's known to always have that beaver fur hat, and then all of a sudden he takes off the hat and changes his hair, changes his beard a little bit, and it really only takes a few things to change your appearance, right? If I all of a sudden, instead of reading glasses, put on my real glasses and wear a wig with a hat over it, all of a sudden I change my appearance. If I put a little bit of a, it's a very, very simple thing for disguises. They talk about this in clandestine operations, right? A spy goes into a place carrying a red backpack. Everyone notices the red backpack, and he goes in the bathroom, pulls out a black backpack and a different change of clothes, different colored hat, that kind of thing. Then they walk out of the bathroom and no one realizes it's the same person because we don't notice those details. So. Actually, Penny, I think this is my 91st. That's true, Linda. She always does look out for me. Well, David, it's like seeing what you want. If someone introduces you as Duke Big Dude, you become Duke Big Dude. And that's what happened when, Anthony Bacon disappears into the continent of Europe, right? Then several years later, or a little while later, we have a guy appearing on the scene by the name of Walter Raleigh, and he becomes a favorite at court. And then when Queen Elizabeth needs someone to keep an eye on her secret son, Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, she puts Francis Bacon on the case. And then what does he do? He introduces Robert Devereux to his brother Anthony, who just returned from the continent. Someone that no one's seen for 12 years. Maybe he looks similar, maybe he didn't, but all you have to do is introduce someone as that name, and all of a sudden Robert Devereux believed it was Anthony Bacon. Yeah, Daniel, they were involved with espionage as well, so changing one's appearance on identity becomes second nature after a while. And you have to remember, guys, these guys practiced these skills of becoming a character on the Globe Theater stage. I mean, that's all it was. It was practice. And then what did they do? They took these roles, this live action role playing, out into the real world. Hi, Mary. Glad you could join us. It's okay. And that's just it, Brent. If all these images or pictures we see of Walter Raleigh with his beard, what if it was a fake beard? It was just, it's all it takes to change your appearance. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, Z. But when we look at how often Parliament was called together and how often people didn't even show up, we think of Parliament as, being the day job where they would go in and see each other every day and do the work of the country. But in reality, there was one stretch where I think Parliament this was under James the First. I think they met once in 3 years. And so you had all these people who, they were parliamentarians. So we see their biographies listed online. And so we think, oh, this was their job. Well, it's not like it was a full-time job. These guys weren't going into work in the morning and punching a time clock and sitting down and staring at each other's faces every day. That's for sure. But yeah, that probably would have been the most difficult part. I love that. I love that song, Ray. John Edwards with a piece of wisdom. Saints are often remembered not by their names alone, but by the symbols that tell their stories, like St. Catherine's shattered wheel or St. Peter's upside down cross. Bacon imitated this. 100%, my friend. Great observation. Okay, gang. Like I said, basically wrap things up and conclude here. What I presented today, and as usual, I don't do these little presentations and claim that these are, decisive proof of anything. But I like to demonstrate that we have this evidence that's making these very strong suggestions that this is the reality of what really happened. And it tends to explain some of those curious things that we always wonder, like, why would this one person, William Alexander, decide he was going to go back and rework someone else's pastoral romance? Really not sure. Yeah, that's true, Jenny. I think we all have those favorites. The 80s movies and catchphrases. It was easier to be attached to these characters. Absolutely. Yeah, Jason. Again, and this is why when we all kind of get together and put our heads together, we're able to, just pile up, these examples of cipher evidence, right? In the center of Ashfeld and Stella frontispiece. On the center is a 33 in the design. Yes. Oh, thanks, Jeff. May not be absolute proof, Jake, but you bring the receipts, and that means so much. Thanks, my friend. And that's really what I try to do whenever I see, some of these correlations. I go out and I look for other examples of corroboration, right? Like Jason was just pointing out, the number 33 appearing in the center of the frontispiece. These are the kinds of things that as we stack it all up, and suddenly, what was only, a signpost, suddenly we have a pile of evidence. And that's what I've tried to do throughout this whole process. And so with the help of Jason and John and William Russell and David, Adam, you guys, make that a whole lot easier. So once again, take it for what it's worth. It's definitely worth looking at. Yeah, Daniel. Have you looked at the frontispiece of Venus and Adonis with the anchor of hope? Yes. And it's that frontispiece has so much in it that that would actually maybe Jason will come on and he and I can do a whole show on that, because there's a lot there for sure. Good observation. Well, that's good question, Jenny. Were there reasons at the time that people wouldn't have wanted France and England under the same rule? Absolutely. You have France was under Vatican control. They were a Catholic nation, and England was obviously Protestant. And so there are all kinds of reasons why they wouldn't have wanted to have the same ruler. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Daniel. That's true, Brent. Most of them are related in some way, shape, or form, for sure. Okay, gang. Well, listen, once again, thanks for joining me. It's, didn't go the full hour tonight, but that's okay. What I've been trying to do is kind of peel off these layers in smaller pieces for everyone. And it's like pulling off that Band-Aid. You want to do it quickly and get it over with, right? So I'm giving people smaller bite-sized portions here and there in terms of what I've been uncovering. My latest rounds of research, not sure when I'm going to get around to publishing all of that, but it will be coming out here within the next year. I'm currently halfway through what I would call, it's not a second edition, but it is a reworking of my original book, The Holy Trinity Decryption. And, just clearing up a few things in there that were kind of fuzzy, because back then I didn't really have as much of a handle on how to do what I did the way I do now. And so I'm going back and revisiting some of that material and clarifying it. But so I want to say thanks for joining me. I appreciate your support. If you like the information, make sure you, as AO always says, smash that like button, subscribe, spread the word of the podcast. I'm going to, like I said, I've been kind of remiss in doing it regularly every 2 weeks, but we're hoping to get back on schedule here by the end of the summer. So I'll be back here in a couple of weeks, and until next time, take care, and make sure that if you haven't already done so, head on over to our Facebook group, Keys of the Rosi Crosse, and the Ghost of Bacon, and make sure you join. Take care, people. See you next time.